There we go.
All right, awesome. 1 second, I'll start a screen share here. Thank you all for coming to the Identity Special Interest Group. Today is August 8th, and we are looking forward to a session with Sam Curran on OpenID DIDComm as a special guest speaker today. Before we do that, we always go through a quick working group updates section, which we will go through quickly. Some Hyperledger working groups and TOIP and some other things happening in the identity community. Before we jump into that, typically we go over some announcements. Are there any announcements for this week that anyone would like to bring up quickly? All right, we will move into our working group updates then. So the first group is the Hyperledger Indie Contributors Working Group call. Was anyone able to attend this session?
Yes, we discussed our Indie quarterly report. The 122.04 upgrade is coming along. We finalized the Indie charter document as well. Now there will be a technical steering committee for the project. So we had some good discussions on what that will look like and generally the charter. And yeah, didn't quite have time for Indie Besu updates and discussion, but that's coming along as well.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Shar. Was anyone able to attend the Hyperledger Areas Working Group session that happened just this week?
I did. We had a short meeting. Also talked about the charter updates. Stephen Kern had prepared some pull requests that we used for evaluation, and looking at making those changes as well.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Sam. Looks like the Bifold users group hasn't met in a while. Ares Cloud Edge and Python met, I believe, just on Tuesday here. Was anyone able to attend this session?
Yes, we discussed release 1.0, getting really close on that one. Releases 0.11.3 and 0.12.2 were published. Those are releases with some fixes related to making sure there's sufficient webhook information sent to an Akamai controller that's using the AIP 2.0 present proof 2.0 protocol. And then 1.0 RC6 has been released. This includes well over 100 PRs merged since release 1.12.1. So that's coming along. Also on DidTW and Akamai, there's a document linked in the meeting page for plans on implementing DidTW and Akamai to enable creation, resolution, issuance verification. And then we also heard from Patrick St. Louis on how to get started spinning up a did web server. So it's a good meeting.
All right, no, very cool. It sounds like a lot happened. Thank you, Shar. Looks like non-creds hasn't met recently. TUIP hasn't met super recently. Looks like the governance stack TUIP group did meet recently. Was anyone able to attend this session? All right, looks like they were mainly focused on the governance architecture task force. Nothing super recently there. And then Diff DidComm met just on Monday here. Was anyone able to attend this session? Can you give us a brief update?
I was not there, but can provide an update. The first Monday meeting of every month is the spec working group call, and so there were some discussions made, mostly about plans. We're hitting August vacation, summertime things, so we had a whole lot of folks off.
That is totally fair. Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Looks like that would make sense. DidComm hasn't met in a couple weeks then, and the interoperability group has not met recently. All right. Any other updates that anyone would like to share before I toss it to Sam?
Hey, Tim, could you hit refresh on the page? I added some in for Open Wallet Foundation because I'm a terrible person who waits to the last minute to update things. Did I
Yeah.
do that last part out loud? Darn. All right. So if you could scroll down, thank you. So real quick, Open Wallet Foundation, quickie update, the Open Wallet meeting calendar, Open Wallet Foundation meeting calendar is there. All of our meetings are run through Linux Foundation PCC. From a news perspective, the architecture SIG has both white paper and meetings, and within the architecture SIG, we are taking a couple weeks off. We're going to come back in the second week of September. But we are working with both the Credo and the Bifold teams to do a project mapping. This is not an evaluation, it's not scoring, but it's more like what are the elements that are in these projects? What are the elements that projects don't have? We're working on a way to give folks a more visual idea of the components that make up the projects within the Open Wallet Foundation. Once we have worked out the kinks in this with the teams at Credo and Bifold, we're going to work with the labs teams as well on that. Safe Wallet SIG, the Safe Wallet Guide is in version 2.0. You're going to notice there are links there, one for the PDF and one for the Markdown. We're going to let folks know about that and start doing some promotion, blog posts, and probably a meetup in 2 weeks. The verifiable credential wallet is the last thing. Verifiable credential wallet, that's a working title. Names of projects are literally the worst thing in the world for me right this today. But a really great team out of MIT, really focused on academic credentials. They were just accepted by the TAC yesterday. If anyone has ever been to IIW, you've probably met Dimitri Z. He's part of the team. He's one of the architects that put this together. So we're very excited that those folks contributed to the project, and now we're in the process of getting them onboarded. Thank you, IDSIG. Oh, one last thing. August 21st, the team at the Farm Worker Wallet OS, it's their first anniversary at Open Wallet Foundation. They're going to be presenting a project status if anyone wants to attend the Open Wallet Foundation Technical Advisory Committee meeting. That's Wednesday, the 21st of August. Thanks.
No, sounds good. Thanks, Sean. That was a lot of information. Anyone else before we give it to Sam? All right, Sam, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, folks, I'll be talking today about the OpenID DIDCOM work that's been primarily done by ID Union. I have the chat open and I'm happy to respond to requests. I'm going to present, describe the project and talk about why it was created, and then I have a code example of it working, and then we can talk about it. Don't be surprised if this comes off a little bit simpler than you expected if you haven't heard about it before, and happy to discuss implications or other sorts of things as it comes. The repo in question here, I will paste in the chat, is an ID Union repo, and that's on purpose. ID Union has been pretty instrumental in funding this work and having the original design for it. A lot of the work was done by university students with money provided by ID Union, and so lots of cool stuff going on there. So the ID Union was an early user of DIDCOM, and they liked the advantages that it provided, and as the OpenID protocols became more popular and were selected by Europe, they needed to implement those, but didn't want to give up the features that they liked in DIDCOM. They liked the ability to message the user and communicate with them alongside the credential workflows, and that's something that they didn't want to lose. They had found a good user experience because of that. And so they wanted to figure out a way to combine or merge the bootstrapping of the two credentials so that they could get kind of both without incurring the a double step sign up process for the user. And so this is pretty good here. I'm not going to read everything that's in this repository. There's a bunch of stuff here that talks about like why this is a good idea or other types of things, not just for communication, but for issuing additional credentials or revocation notification or other sorts of things like that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here as well that talks a little bit about what's going on. I'm going to skip forward here to a little bit of OAuth 2. OAuth 2 is what OpenID Connect is built on. OpenID Connect then of course is most similar to not exactly, but most similar to the OpenID for VC protocols. So OpenID for VCI for issuance and OpenID for VEP for presentation. So here's a little bit of an idea here. You have a client. This is a client server oriented approach. And so there are flows that you do. You start with an authorization request and get given that. You can trade that authorization grant for an access token, and then you use the access token to access the protected resource. And this splitting of roles and steps here has been really important with OAuth to serve large-scale systems, so that you can actually have like an authorization server that just does authorizations in a resource server that just does the providing of the resources, and without having to sort of do all of the tasks in one. And so that's been a really useful flow that they've come up with. And so here's the flow for issuance. The demo, by the way, in the state of the project is that it's fairly well defined for how to do this during the issuance process. We're working right now on the presentation process to adapt the approach to a credential presentation to gain the same benefit. And so here's what OpenID for VCI looks like generally. You have a user that's using a wallet that's often on a phone, and so the first things that happen is the wallet downloads the credential issuer's metadata, and it issues an authorization request that includes the type of credential to be issued, and then some process happens to decide if they should authenticate the user or whatever. And then an authorization response comes back with a code. You can then provide the code and receive an access token, and then finally exchange the access token for a credential. This is a little bit short-circuited here with the pre-auth flow, which is very common, where you have a pre-authorized code instead of a unique one in order to retrieve the token, and you get an access token back. So and then you use it to retrieve the credential. So there's some commentary here, but the interaction here is very API based. It's very familiar to those that come from the OpenIT world. It's not the same precisely because of the involvement that needs to happen, but it's pretty close, and it follows sort of a well-known brand and a well-known flow pattern for that. Here's what the work here proposes to standardize on for accomplishing the goal of both the OpenID protocol interaction and ending up with a DIDCOM connection at the end of it. And it's important that those two are linked together so that you can see and understand that the party on one side of the OpenID interaction is the same party on the other side of the DIDCOM interaction, and that way you can consider them the same and sort of use them interchangeably without loss of trust as part of that process. So here's a little bit of a flow where we've added some additional information to kind of describe what's actually happening here, and you'll notice that there's some stuff in green. So when the wallet retrieves the issuer metadata, there's an additional DIDCOM DID present and an indication of whether DIDCOM is required or optional. If the DIDCOM DID is the DID used to establish the DIDCOM connection, and then this is a little bit of a client hint about what the issuer's expectations around this process, about whether they establish it or not. And then we've actually represented the authorized flow and the pre-auth flow in two separate steps here. The important bit is that there's an authorization, that there's a request and a response that actually comes back. And in the request that's made, in addition to the scope, which indicates the credential that they want to have issued as part of that process, they include a DIDCOM scope. And that, when they're making the access token request, that's the token request here or the token request there. The reason why this is powerful is that in the OpenID world, the access token that you receive is authorized within particular scopes. So in this particular sense, when you receive an access token, with these requested scopes, the access token grants you the permission to be issued the university degree credential, and that happens later on in the flow. But it also grants you use of the access token within the DIDCOM scope. And in this case, we're not issuing a DIDCOM credential, of course. We're just using it to establish that connection. And so that's actually what happens next, is that there's a simple DIDCOM protocol. It's not ping and acknowledge. That's a little bit of an older diagram, but you present the access token that it received and that you're authorized to do so with a scope. to the issuer here, and then you receive an acknowledgement back, and that binds a new or an existing DIDCOM relationship to that OpenID interaction. And then this last step, the OpenID protocol flow happens as expected, and so. There's very little modification, in fact, no spec-related modifications at all on the OpenID side. There's some additional metadata, which because it's JSON should be ignored if not understood. And then there's an additional scope included, which follows the expectations and the rules of the OpenID flows that it's built on. There is a DIDCOM protocol for use in here that describes how those messages are to be passed, and then the credential passes as well. So at the very end of this flow, you of course have the credential issued as desired, and then you also have a DIDCOM connection that you can use to do all the things that DIDCOM can do. The user didn't really need to be involved in any part of this process. They typically, not shown in the very beginning, they typically do something like click a link or scan a QR code in order to engage in that OpenID for VCI flow. And because of that process and the retrieval of the issuer metadata, there's no other user interactions that are required in order to make this actually work. In their agent software that is doing all of the OpenID flow also can then end up with a DIDCOM connection at the end of it to make that happen. And so that's what the flow looks like. I've said a lot of words. Are there any questions about how this works or the implications of it or anything else? Yeah, Christos.
Yeah, hi Sam. Yeah, I got a bunch of questions. Starting off, you chose to advertise these values in the issuer's metadata. However, in order for the wallet to be able to actually get the issuer URL, it needs the credential offer. So that mechanism is not something that this specification considers or
it considers
addressing.
but does not change. So the QR code that you would scan, the offer of that actually happens prior to this flow engaging. And so this is not the first. It's not like a wallet. It pops into existence and an issuer pops into existence. The wallet has already received the credential offer from the issuer prior to this diagram beginning, and that's how they know which issuer to retrieve the issuer metadata of. Does that make
Right.
sense?
So let me rephrase it because I didn't say it correctly, maybe. So the OpenID for VC standards do not force you to use QR codes or anything to transfer the credential offer.
It's correct. It's actually undefined, which is interesting.
Right.
The spec does not actually say. So this assumes that the credential offer has passed. And we're not proposing that that has to happen with DIDCOM. It can, incidentally, but for the flow here, we're assuming that the credential offer has passed from the issuer to the wallet according to the requirements, or rather non-requirements, of the OpenID for VCI specification.
Okay, so this is out of scope. I mean,
Yes.
passing credential offer. Okay, one thing. Okay, great. Can I ask follow-ups?
Please.
Please interrupt
Absolutely.
me. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, obviously, since you're using this protocol using DIDCOM, obviously the issuer's DID needs to be resolvable to a doc that contains a DIDCOM service endpoint.
That's correct.
Correct. And the wallet, I assume, also needs to employ a DID method that
It does.
contains a service endpoint. Okay.
It
Okay.
does. Yes.
All right. So can you elaborate a little bit on this DIDCOM required field? Like, let's say it's the issuer says it's required or it's not required. Like, what does this mean in terms of semantics?
Yeah, so it really means, so when you make the credential request, there's a couple of responses existing in the OpenID specification, and one of them is like, it's not ready yet. Like, I can't give you the credential, it isn't ready yet, so come and ask for it later, right? And so we're representing the credential request as a simple, request response flow, but in reality, there's some variations there that can occur. So they can say like I haven't generated the credential yet. It's not really available for you, so you have to make another request in the future. The implication of indicating that this is required is that retrieving the credential request requires as a precondition this DIDCOM exchange, which binds the DIDCOM channel to the OpenID interaction, which means that the expectation is that if DIDCOM is stated as required by the issuer, that the actual credential request will not be fulfilled until the client actually does this. And then they will go ahead and fulfill that request. If it is optional, then they will continue it and are capable of receiving the DIDCOM interaction, at some other time. It could be before, but it could also be after. But they're not going to gate the presentation of the issuance of the credential on the completion of that flow. And that means that the issuer can decide how important it is. Now, I don't expect that issuers are generally going to independently make these decisions. I believe these decisions will generally be made by ecosystems, meaning an ecosystem gets together and they say, hey, we really want these both to be used. So here's the expectation that people do, and then all of the issuers and the holders and further the holders and the verifiers will actually understand that this is an ecosystem requirement to do this, but this simply provides the mechanism by which they make it happen. In that case, the DIDCOM required or the DIDCOM optional is more of a convenience for detecting that behavior, because it's likely going to be decided at some sort of ecosystem level.
Thank you very much for your answers. I'm gonna stop for now because there are other people that want to ask questions, and maybe I can come back with the rest later. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. Roberto.
Thank you, Sam. Quick question. Where do the DID peers start in this process? Because I always use DIDCOM with peer DIDs, and I was expecting really, basically you connect over OpenID, and then the last step, when you get the token back, if you have the DIDCOM scope, here's a DIDCOM invite, payload, like the QR code, and then internally you continue the flow normally over DIDCOM. But I'm not sure how, after this step, how the DID peers, how is that match made in order to continue over DIDCOM? When you transfer, when do you switch from OpenID to DIDCOM, basically, or how?
Well, you don't actually switch; they happen in parallel. So you're still able to use OpenID after you have DIDCOM, of course. They're not mutually exclusive. So this DID is not expected because it's published in the issuer metadata. This could be a peer DID, but this is in many cases going to be a more established DID. So DID web, TDW, TDW would be a great use, for here. Or if you have a ledger method of choice, then any DID can work here. The only requirement is, of course, that it's capable of DIDCOM endpoint. So the wallet starts out knowing this DID. The issuer learns of the wallet's DID during this first exchange, and so they send a message to the DID, a present from a DID, and that's how it's learned with the token that present in the message, so that this can be associated with whatever internal context is necessary for the OpenID interaction. It's possible using DIDCOM v2 for the issuer to then rotate to a peer DID from the one that they have up here, or any other DID, frankly, as part of this process, and that step would actually happen in the acknowledge message that comes back. And so peer DIDs are an excellent DID method for use on the wallet side, but that would be learned right here as part of the message sent with the token. This diagram and the example does assume DIDCOM v2. I should be very clear.
Right. Okay. So then it does happen at the end. You get a DID peer or no, or it's not.
You get a DID. It doesn't have to be a DID peer, but it could be.
Right. And as well at the beginning, could be a mediator DID, for example, saying, "Hey, this is my endpoint."
Yeah. A DID that uses mediation, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It could
Okay.
absolutely be, according to all the normal DIDCOM stuff. So DIDCOM itself and this flow does not take an opinion on which DID method you use, so long as it's resolvable to and can contain a DIDCOM service endpoint. And so DID peer can be used, but it certainly doesn't have to be. Any DIDCOM capable DID will be useful here.
Right. But yeah, but I mean, usually DID peers are created after the invite process at the end
It's
of
created.
that. So,
It's created as part of that process of exchange. In DIDCOM v1,
yeah.
there's a little bit more of a handoff process. There's either the connections protocol or the DID exchange protocol in use in order to make that happen. In DIDCOM v2, there is no precursor handshaking step for that, which means
Mm-hmm.
that you just learn the party's DID on the first message they send you, and that's it.
Right. Okay, so
So
this
so
is
like
agnostic to what you use as a DID solution
that's
for
correct.
your DIDCOM. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's up to you basically to define that, but it's not like
Yeah.
require any type of method. Like it really is
That's
up to you to kind of implement that.
That's correct. So
Okay.
DIDCOM v1 had some slight favoritism towards peer DIDs and some special handling for them. And DIDCOM v2, special handling is gone. And so you just use the method you need, and that's why DID peer 2, for example, has a method of expressing all of the stuff as necessary. And so but DIDCOM v2 special handling is gone. A DID is a DID is a DID from the DIDCOM v2's perspective.
Right.
Excellent
Right.
questions. Yeah, more. Any more, Roberto?
Not right now. Maybe later.
Christos? Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Christos, any more questions? I will tempt the demo gods and run a live code demo as part of the example.
I don't want to intervene with the flow. I have more questions, but I don't want to intervene too much. So we can take this afterwards if that's okay. So whatever you wish.
Absolutely. Why don't I do the demo and then
Yeah,
we'll come
yeah.
back to questions. The questions that you have, I'm assuming that other people also have. And so it's having you ask them is very good and not a waste of time in any way. Okay, so I will do a demo, and the code for the demo is I should walk around the repo just a little bit. So the code has all the code that I'm about to run in here. That's all present, and there's also a markdown file with the drafts protocol that's actually in use in the demo. So here's a present token message, and it has the OpenID token that was passed. And then there's an acknowledge that's similar. There's also a rejection message. If for some reason the access token was not recognized, as presented by the issuer, this error message that comes back gives the opportunity for the user to to understand a flow or restart something or whatever else. But the normal flow is for this token to be presented and then to be acknowledged the other direction. And then, of course, both parties know each other's DIDs and can continue. So that's here. The code is here, and there's some stuff in here. To be honest, they had added some new stuff by the time I last did this demo, and so I'm actually running on a slightly old version because I knew how the demo worked. But if you have questions, then you can raise an issue on the repo or anything else, and we'll get stuff working. But here's the fundamental pieces of the demo. This is built using to the best of my knowledge, it uses, watch me blank on the name. It's a project at Verimo. It uses Verimo and it uses Spherian libraries together in order to make this work. And so that's how this works. So I have this is the issuer side on the left, and this is the client on the right are the two things that are going on here. So they have a little bit of a menu interface here. Again, all of this code and the vast majority of all this work was done by ID Union. So I'm acting as a presentation face here today, but this is not my work. I can't take credit for it. So I'm going to run an issuer, and this sets up the necessary OpenID stuff, and I'm going to create a credential offer. And then I'm going to, for this demo here, So I realize I'm running this in two terminals, and there could obviously be some like hand waving to demonstrate this without it actually happening. But this is actually happening. It's going to actually do the OpenID issuance and the DIDCOM stuff between these two terminals. So I'm passing the credential offer from the issuer here on the left to the wallet, the client here on the right, and a bunch of stuff's going to happen when I hit enter, and we can walk through it. So you'll see that this did a metadata request, and that happened. This indicated that DIDCOM was required. The client retrieved that, and so then it made a token request and received a token. And the token, here's the tokens that it received: the university degree credential and DIDCOM. And so now it has that. The DIDCOM messages, according to the protocol that we just showed here, the DIDCOM messages were then passed back and forth to present the token and then acknowledge it back on the other side. And then it completed the issuance of the credential itself. And here's the credential that was actually issued, right? You can tell it's something about a subject university degree credential. The content isn't the interesting bit here, but it is an actual issued credential. And so you'll notice that we end up with we're still running here, and we have ended up with a DIDCOM chat thing here. And so one of the things that OpenID is out of scope for OpenID is the ability to then push a message to the user without sort of any other user interaction or something like that happen. So there could be some interaction between the two parties to offer them some additional credentials or any sort of process or explaining anything that actually happens, right? So the messages that are actually traveling back and forth here are basic messages inside of DIDCOM v2, and it's sending those messages back and forth between these two pieces of software running Verimo as part of that. And so the only thing that I actually passed from the issuer to the client side is the credential offer. And then using that, it knew how to look up the metadata and go through the other interactions as described. And the end result is that, of course, we have a DIDCOM now relationship. Both parties know the other DIDCOM capable DID on the other side. And so we're using basic message, but any other message can actually be used. There's no magic there as to what actually happens. The other thing that I should mention is that both DIDCOM and OpenID are created to be credential type agnostic, which means that nothing breaks if you issue a credential over OpenID and then present that credential over DIDCOM, or vice versa. You issue it over DIDCOM and present it over OpenID. There's nothing that breaks as part of that process, and I'm pleased that that's the case on both sides. That there's no sort of decisions or limitations on what you can actually pass. And so this is the running code example. Of course, the interesting bit is looking, if you're interested in how the code actually does this, as opposed to the fact that I can do a demo on the screen. But this shows that process of issuing a credential and then immediately being able to pick up and send messages back and forth from a DIDCOM perspective. So that's the code example. I see a message from Jimmy. I have an application using DIDCOM v1. How is this update going to help my app? It's hard to understand how accepting a credential will change the UX. If you already are using credentials over DIDCOM v1, then you can still do that. We're not going to remove the ability to do credentials in DIDCOM at all. But if you have a requirement to interact with the OpenID protocols, then this is a way that you can still fulfill that and even end up with a DIDCOM relationship when possible with the other parties that are doing OpenID but also support DIDCOM. So this is a nice way to sort of to bind them together. This doesn't require this optional OpenID DIDCOM flow does not require a change, and could actually probably be done with DIDCOM v1. We just didn't model it that way because we were, things are moving and adopting to DIDCOM v2 anyway. So that's how we built it from that perspective. Does that answer your question, Jimmy? Or did I miss the point in what you're asking?
I'm having a hard time understanding how how V1 is different than V2. We
Oh,
both did.
that's a great conversation, but a little bit out of scope of this OpenID DIDCOM work. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you about that at some other point. It mostly got simpler. There's less required at the beginning, and there's like one way to do attachments instead of three. And there's no special handling for did peer. So mostly the DIDCOM v2 got simpler is the short answer of what's new there.
I see. But I
But
mean,
yeah,
as far as
that's
the UX is concerned, it's not going to change my UX too much. I still have to accept the credential or accept the conversation in DIDCOM.
yeah, probably. Um, I mean, it depends on the UX you have now, but I don't. The protocol itself does not have, I think, massive implications on the UX.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, totally. Christos, did you have more questions?
Yes. So short follow-up, I guess, to the previous one. So I'm not very savvy with DIDCOM v2. However, in typical Aries flow, you would need to first, the user provides consent to connect with the other person, and then you get another consent screen for, I don't know, for the presentation request or the credential offer, right?
Yeah, so the consent around the credentials is important. Consent around the
Yes.
creation of the connection was mostly an accident. It was
Okay.
demonstrated early on in the Aries ecosystem because we were trying to show the steps that actually occurred. The problem with consenting to connect to another individual is that there's not a way to pass trusted information about the other individual prior to making a connection itself. And so typically the cleanest way to do that user experience is to simply accept that connection that's made, unless you have reason not to, like you've done it before and you've decided to block them or something. But accept the connection, engage in the exchange of credentials, like your software could automatically ask them to present various types of credentials, and then present that information to the user to decide if they're going to keep the connection or not. It can be flagged as temporary or tentative or something until the user actually decides to keep it. But making expressing consent prior to ever even exchanging a message with the user is actually not a practical UX choice because they have no trusted information to act upon.
Okay, so here, because in the OpenID for VC, when you get a credential offer and your wallet attempts to handle it, it shows you a consent screen. This guy wants to give you this or these credentials. So this is the initial consent screen, but DIDCOM v2 does not force you in any way to display an additional user consent because it's assumed in the consent that the user has already provided for the credential offer.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
And they're actually not receiving anything over DIDCOM itself except for that exchange of token, which contains no personal information at all. The only credential that's actually the only meaningful information that's passing in this particular interaction is the credential issued over OpenID. So the fact that it was presented and the user scanned the QR code and then went through that process is still relevant for the OpenID issued credential, but then doesn't have much of an opinion on what they do with the DIDCOM side of things. Does this change my UX for consent first? I think consent is important when you are choosing to share things with the user, with the other side. I think consent for reception is always been a weird concept. I think that acknowledging that you've received a credential or something of that interaction, I think does make sense. And consent is very important when you're saying, hey, the user would like you to present this credential. Are you sure you want to do that? That's the right time for consent to be important. I think that when the software is just doing things like receiving information from the other party, like a presentation from the other party, consent there is a little bit weirder. I'm talking more in abstract terms now about what we ask the user for consent for and what we don't. But outbound information, definitely consent. or the user has consented already, like via policy, like accept these in the future. But for the reception of information, I think consent there becomes unimportant and could really get in the way or confusing the user about what's really going on. So there isn't, from a UX perspective, there is the OpenID DIDCOM that's worked to sort of bootstrap both of them together. Places no UX constraints at all that don't already exist in the OpenID interactions that are being attached to. So no UX changes there. Christos, other questions?
Yes. So sorry.
No, yeah,
Big
this is excellent.
big nerd. So one question more like organizational wise, let's call it. Have you, I don't know, is there some kind of collaboration with the authors, at least of the OpenID for VC specs or something like that?
The communication with them, we've shown them what we've done and gotten some feedback from it. Notably, we don't require any modifications to those specifications, so there's not really like there's not really like official approval they could give us, and by us I mean mostly the IDE Union folks doing the work. But they have totally acknowledged it, and there hasn't been a problem there. So we are definitely working with them. The folks that work on that spec are of varying levels of understanding for why people would want to do this. There's folks that understand DIDCOM but don't feel like it's a priority. And there's folks that don't understand why someone would want to use DIDCOM at all. And this is not necessarily a selling pitch on why you would want to use it, although I can give one of those, but rather just an explanation that if you do want to use them together, then here's a really clean way to do it.
Well, if I may provide a selling pitch or a suggestion, if I may say,
Sure. Yeah.
it will be very, very useful. Okay, so one of the big problems in the OpenID for VC specs is that you cannot, let's say you have interacted with an issuer before, there's no way for you to asynchronously submit a credential offer to a wallet. And this is actually a very important use case for enterprise scenarios where people really, really want to push asynchronous credential offers to wallets, obviously after some kind of relationship has been established. So I would suggest, if that's in the scope of what you consider in this spec, sort of standardizing, let's say, how a credential offer message can be pushed from the issuer to the wallet, so that people, have some sense of interoperability in supporting this flow. If that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and I'm looking around in another browser tab for oh, come on, stop it. I'm looking around for notes that have been created somewhere about that, but that's absolutely one of the things that's been recognized is that you could send that. Oh, I did a copy and a paste here for the credential offer. You could send that in a DIDCOM message and then engage the rest of it in the OpenID issuance protocol in order to bridge that gap that exists. And that prevents you from having to prompt the user in an out-of-band communication channel to scan, click, or something in order to receive that credential offer. So you are dead on for one of the really useful things you can do here.
And obviously this extends to the OpenID for VP presentation request, assuming.
Yep. So they're still working out how to do it with OpenID for VP. There's some differences in the flow on the OpenID side that means we can't do exactly the same thing, and so we're now working on that. I should also include a general request here that The initial amount of this work was done by funding for ID Union that went to university students to produce the actual working code examples. That funding is done, like it was not a perpetual project, and they are for folks that are interested. It would be very useful if you care about this sort of a thing to join the work and help it along. Since the end of the ID Union funding, there has been less progress just because there's been less hands to do the work. And so if you are interested, then you can please do reach out to me, and I can forward your contact info to the ringleader of this project is Arthur Phillip, who is this guy. That's his icon on GitHub. And so he's the one organizing the work and running the meetings and stuff like that. And you would be very welcome. I am not a lot of them have been German in the past. They've been very kind to me, and they speak English when I'm on the call. And I'm sure they would be happy to have you, regardless of your German skills, since I don't have very good German skills. So that would be. So that would be great. If you please send me your email address, then I will go ahead and forward that to Arthur and help that to happen. Because that would be great. We're there. We need to make that. And so anyway, that was my pitch for involvement. And hope you will take us up on that to continue this work. It's not very complicated, but it's more like making small changes than making sure that they're the right small changes or additions rather to what's going on. So I can't find the protocol definition that we have. Oh, no, here it is. Hang on. I just found it. I don't know why I couldn't find it before. It was right on the screen in front of me. This is the beginnings of a draft protocol to push a credential offer for OpenID for VC flows in order to make that happen. So there's a little bit of some not yet done here, but anyway, that's one of the excellent uses. Okay, sorry for talking so long. Roberto, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Question or maybe clarification and then a question. So if I understood correctly, basically you piggyback on top of the credential offer protocol over OpenID to then end up with a DITCOM relationship or connection. Is that
yes
sort of accurate? Okay.
I think that is. Very specifically, we use the issuer metadata and an additional scope, plus this is not an OpenID thing, plus the DITCOM protocol to make it happen. So it's very additive. You don't have to modify anything or change anything. You just add some additional information to the OpenID flows. Yes. Okay.
And is it possible to start this in another way that is not the credential offer? No, from OpenID, but not requiring a credential offer, like any other starting points.
So the obvious starting point is a presentation of a credential. So using the OpenID for VP instead of VCI protocol. And in that way, you could also do that during a credential presentation. So that's the natural follow-on work that we're doing next. We wanted to do it during issuance first, and then presentation is the next natural way to do it. There isn't actually. Those are either issuance or presentation of protocol are the only things that the OpenID for VC protocols really do. It would be possible to generalize this outside and just use it for OpenID interactions generally that have nothing to do with verifiable credentials, so long as you manage the scope stuff that you're talking about. But in those cases, there's often other useful things to do. For example, if a user is logged in to a website, rather than going through a flow like this, you could simply display them an invitation QR code that they could scan with their phone. So there's
right.
You could do it maybe a little bit more simply, but the two obvious ones are the issuance, which we've done, and the presentation, which we're doing next.
Okay, great. And here's what I'm thinking: if it's possible to create a DITCOM relationship or connection across federated systems, across different OpenID systems, from users let's say I have an identity wallet and I can connect to different federated systems, right, through OpenID, right? And there's another user on the other side with their wallet, maybe a different wallet, also connecting over OpenID, and they want to connect to each other, and they reach each other through one of these systems. Because they both talk DITCOM, is it possible? Could this be expanded to achieve that sort of situation where you basically use DITCOM or an OpenID to bridge that gap, and you can sort of create a request to connect through OpenID, and in the end, you establish the channel. You use OpenID to exchange tokens and everything that's required to acknowledge that requirement or connection, accept it, and then keep talking over DITCOM, basically.
So yeah, I'm extrapolating a little bit from what you're saying, but would it be possible to integrate this approach into OpenID Connect generally for login, such that my user profile in any given system could have an associated DID, and then could be used for folks to discover and connect with people outside of those systems? I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And the answer is yes, that definitely could be done. There's nothing that really stops that from occurring. Our interest has been primarily around the VC related flows, but there's absolutely nothing. There's nothing preventing this the same type of approach, even if it's a little different, from working in other contexts.
Okay, great. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jimmy, your hand's up again. That's not a disappointed response. I'd love that your hand's up.
So I, my real estate app gives credentials for buyer, seller, neighbor, and owner. It connects neighbors and buyers. It connects sellers and buyers. And I, right now, the credential issued goes back and forth and connects the people. But then we want to do more, like, would you put in the scope, like how much somebody is pre-approved for, or if they smoke cigars or goes fishing? I mean, is that what you can do? And I'm just wondering if it would come before the DIDCOM connection, or if it's always something that happens after.
It depends on whether you're passing the credential over OpenID or whether you're passing it over one of the DIDCOM credential exchange protocols. If it's with the DIDCOM ones, then you need to have the DIDCOM connection there. If you're doing it over OpenID, then you could pass the credential sort of in this method, prior to the DIDCOM relationship being exercised. So it depends either way. This is mostly if you already have the ability to exchange credentials, then it works. If you want to use OpenID, then this is a good way to do it without giving up DIDCOM. If you are already exchanging credentials, then and you don't really have a need to use OpenID, then the credentials themselves don't really change with either protocol. So it really depends on whether the other types of software that you're interacting with want to speak OpenID with you or not. And this allows you to do that in a nice, organized way. So that's probably really it. As far as like what type of data you pass in the exchange and when with credentials, that's relatively the same between the OpenID protocols and the DIDCOM protocols, just because it relates more to credentials themselves rather than what's going on there.
Thank you.
These were excellent questions. We only have like 3 minutes left. Any final things, or Shar, what's the protocol for how quick we end, or final thoughts by you?
Yeah, we can go right till the end. I had a quick question. I was wondering how the issuer design will need to change to dynamically use different issuance methods. I was looking at that note at the end on further work.
And in my understanding of how this is generally implemented in software is that if you implement DIDCOM and you implement the OpenID endpoints, then the ability they don't really conflict from a sort of a code execution perspective. So the larger issue is what you are presenting from a user experience perspective as part of that process. For example, do you display only an OpenID QR code to pass the as an option to pass the credential offer? Are you going to use a link? Do you do both OpenID and DIDComm? A lot of that depends on your knowledge of your users and what they already use, etc. I do like the ability to push things, which means that, for example, if you're on a website and you do an OpenID credential issuance and then they end up with a DIDComm relationship, they could then have a button that just says, hey, issue this other credential, and rather than having you scan something with your phone, it uses the like a credential offer push DIDComm protocol in order to push that to your phone, just so that it's more convenient. Then you can just hit the accept button rather than like having to point the phone at your screen type of a thing. And so there's definitely implications on UX, but they're not really imposed by this. I think they're more opened up by this, in the sense that you have some opportunities to improve user experience that you may not without the combination of these.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Perfect. And I will. I had a volunteer to be involved. I'll reach out to you, pass your info along, and I hope to keep working on this work and hope that we keep doing awesome stuff. I am a fan of the adoption of verifiable credentials, and so I'm excited about the European efforts, etc. I'm also a real fan of DIDComm, and I think that it has a huge potential to improve the way that our technology works in a way that's friendly to humans and the devices they use. So I'm grateful that you came to hear this presentation. Thanks to the ID Union folks for doing the majority of this work, and we will see you all later.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thanks for taking the time for a great presentation and discussion. Our next call in 2 weeks, we will be joined by Andreas Sigurdsson, who will talk about the Zada Trust Network and ecosystem. So please join us for that. Thanks everyone who provided working group updates as well and questions. Thanks again to Sam, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.